Hello everyone, welcome back to today's analyst for 28th of November 2023, where we'll be trying to understand the most important articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express. Now, looking at the table of contents, we find the very first article is about the factors of agri-technology. This is from a very beautiful explained piece in the Indian Express. Next, we'll be trying to understand how Qatar is now being a mediator in the Israel-Palestine issue. In the next one, we'll be understanding a very important article from the Hindu, where it is talking about the reforms that are needed in the Supreme Court institution. Next, we'll be trying to understand what is phenomenon known as dollarizing the economy, particularly the concerns of the recent president-elect in Argentina. And finally, we'll be trying to understand what is fiber optic cables, which is a very important article related to internet connectivity all the world. In this very first discussion, we will be trying to understand the very important role of technology in Indian agriculture, and this is coming from a recent Niti Aayog paper, or say a research paper by Ramesh Chand and Jaspal Singh, who are agroeconomists, who estimated the trend growth in the gross value addition in Indian agriculture from the independence times, that is from the 1950s to present. So whatever information that we will be getting in this is very important for your GS3 section of the syllabus, which is pertaining to various aspects of Indian agriculture. Now it is very important to quote some examples, some references in your mains answers. So let this be a very important quote for your agricultural answers if you want to increase the value addition of your answers. Right. Now let us start with the basics first. See, the study of economics as a subject is always looking at the allocation of scarce resources. That means that in any economy or in any country, whatever resources we have in the cases of say land, water and other resources, they are always limited in nature, right? So this is the very first important thing that economists generally study, that is the allocation of the scarce resources. And when those resources are generally allocated among owners, or say owners of various factors, we generally have four factors in economics that relates to production. So generally we know that land, labor, capital and entrepreneurship. So these are the four kinds of factors of production that generally are attributed to the owners of the production. For example, say the person who is owning a large piece of land, that person's income will be the rent that is coming from the land, right? So rent will be the income. Now the laborer will be getting the wages. Then the capital owners, they will be getting interest, such as the banks, right? Then the entrepreneurs who involve their mind, creativity, innovation, they will be getting profits. So these are the four factors of production in economics as a subject. Now the authors of this study, they argue that in agriculture also we have four factors of production in agriculture. Now the four factors of production in agriculture are land, water, labor and energy. Now we have to understand, that is a very basic premise of agriculture, that you need land to cultivate your crops, right? So you need land, and that land cannot be any land. That land has to be abundant with soil fertility and also water resources, right? So we have to understand that in India, we have various kinds of land in various geological areas of India. For example, we have land spanning from the Himalayas to the coastal areas too. So we have different amount of soil in those regions. Now according to this article, we can see that the yield per acre in India is according to the various attributes of various soils in India. Now from, this is the descending order of the soil fertility that you can keep in mind for prelims examination if you were asked to arrange the levels of soil fertility in India according to their soils. So this is the descending order. That means the most fertile soil in India is the alluvial soil and the least is a desert soil. Now we have to understand the yield per acre in alluvial soil will be far higher than all the soils that are following it. And that is why the agricultural lands are the most precious land for agriculture in India. And also we have to understand that the extent of agricultural cultivation in India is mostly concentrated in two of these soils, that is the alluvial soil, which is abundantly available in the North Indian plains and also along the rivers of the southern peninsula and also along the coastal regions. Then the black soil is abundant in the Deccan Traps. So these are the two most fertile soils when we talk about agriculture. Now in this paper that we are discussing, this Niti Aayog paper is telling that before the Green Revolution, the Indian agriculture was going at only 2.8 per annum. As we can see, before, say from 1950 to around 1962, this average growth was only around 2.8%. Subsequently, during this period also, the central government, the state governments, they undertook the land reform movements in most of the states of India. Now when land were liberalized and they were, say, accorded ownership, and when more and more farmers started cultivating their crops, the net sown area or NSA grew from 118 lakh hectares to 135 lakh hectares at the eve of Green Revolution. So we can understand, by just undertaking reforms in one factor of production, we can have a net sown area jump, jump in agriculture productivity by this amount. So imagine the amount of, say, productivity jump that we can see across all water, labor and energy all together. Now when we talk of water, water is a function in agriculture that is derived from the amount of rainfall and also the access of irrigation from, say, rivers, tanks, ponds, that are the common sources of irrigation for agriculture. Then labor. Labor in India is generally, say, driven by the manual labor that is provided by farmer families and also the animals that are employed by them. And finally, energy is also very, very important. Energy, that means the amount of electricity that is being consumed by the farmers, the amount of fossil fuel or, say, the petrol or diesel that is consumed for tractors, threshers, harvesters combined. So these are all the energy requirements of the farmers too, because they need these as a process of the production. And finally, we have to understand that if we combine energy, or say if we use more and more tractors or more and more use of technology in the agriculture, this can have far more greater boost in labor, in water and in land factor of production too. That means the amount of technology we will using, it is just multiplying the benefits that you are getting out of it, right? Okay. Now, further we have to understand that there are further 4 factors of technology in agriculture. See, the genetics aspect is very, very important. For example, say the use of genetically modified organisms such as the BT cotton. This is an outcome of the amount of technological investment, technological research that Indian and also, say, the world researchers in agriculture have attributed to. And that is why we can understand the GMO crops such as the BT cotton is resistant to pests, is having a better productivity. So they are actually far more desired to be cultivated than traditional cotton seeds. So we can understand that technological aspects in genetics is very, very important regarding seeds and plant breeding. And it is the very thing that was introduced in India during the Green Revolution, when the seeds were of high yielding varieties or HYV seeds. They were having certain characteristics such as reduced height, semi-dwarfing, because the wheat crop, for example, they were having heavy tops. Due to that heavy tops, the wheat crops were actually falling towards the ground. Now, using genetic technology, we are having reduced height, semi-dwarfing, disease, pest resistance, heat, drought resistance, and also harvesting compatibility. That means the amount of tractors that you will be using. So when the tractors will be harvesting the crops must be of a suitable height so that the combine harvester machine can use the particular crops for their harvesting. So we can understand that at the genetic level, the technological improvements can yield many benefits. Next, when we look at crop nutrition, we are actually talking about fertilizers in the case of, say, urea, diammonium phosphate, that is providing the nitrogen and phosphorus, and also muriate of potash, that is providing potassium, and also animal manure, that is feeding into crop nutrition and multiplying the output of the particular crops. Then we have to understand that with reference to genetics and crop nutrition, we also need to protect the crops. That is defending the plants against, say, pests, pathogens such as fungi, bacteria and other microorganisms, and also weeds. Now, we have to understand, when we are talking about plant protection, we are talking about the protection level that is attributed from the plant being just a seed to marketing level. That means protecting at the market level too from the same things. So we have to understand these are also done via the use of chemicals, and these have been in the use since Green Revolution, and this is one of the very aspects that is preserving the plant, that is enabling the protection of the plant or say the crops in the markets too. Next, we have to understand in this aspect, it is also a labor saving aspect. For example, say when we talk about various crops and when we use herbicides, that means these particular chemicals do not permit the growth of herbs or too much of herbs around it, or say weeds around it, the crops. Now we have to understand that when we are using chemicals to say prevent the growth, we are not employing more and more labor. So it is saving labor also and also labor costs. Next, and the final one is about agricultural interventions or say innovations too. For example, say use of tractors, which is making the benefit of say using less and less labor, having more and more yield per acre. Then the amount of water saving technologies such as drip irrigation and laser level land levelers, which use particularly technologies to boost the crop productivity. Then we also have a recent case study from Rajasthan. We know Rajasthan is a water parched area, but it is now growing pomegranates. So it is a very good example of how technologies such as tractors, drip irrigation and also land level measurers, they can be used to totally transform a non-cultivable area to a cultivable area. Next, we have to understand we can use also innovations in the amount of cropping patterns that we have. For example, say if you just have some raised beds, for example, if this is your fields and these are the columns, right, where you are having a appraised section of the soil or land, then you can plant sugarcane on these appraised sections, and on the lower or say lower beds you can plant say short cycle crops such as say potato, such as tomato, onion and so on. This will be ensuring that in addition to your main crop, that is sugarcane, you are also utilizing the same soil and the same chemicals and technology for say growth of another secondary or tertiary crop that will be adding to farmers' income. And that is also following the Ashok Dalwai committee recommendation of doubling the farmers' income in India, because we can have more crop for the same amount of land. And finally, there is this new advent of technology known as drones, which can say map your land, which can say spray fertilizers, pesticides and even water for irrigation. This can monitor or say also use the GPS technologies to track and monitor the growth of plants. It can also track or say give you advice on which crop to grow on a particular amount of land. So drone application is right now being witnessed in the Indian agricultural scene. Now here we need to also have some observations. See, there is no second questions that factors of technology have trumped the factors of production, because technology is having the capability of disrupting everything and disrupting in a good manner. Such as, see, we have already seen that the net sown area actually increased just around 3.3% during or say after Green Revolution to present times, that is 1962 to around 2020, that is present. Now why we are saying it is only 3.3%? Because before Green Revolution, when the land reforms were actually being taking place, it jumped to around 14%. That means net sown area jumped to around 14% during the land reforms and only around 3.3% during the Green Revolution to present times. But this does not mean that the agricultural growth was stagnant. Right? This does not in any way mean that the agricultural growth, as you can see here, did it become stagnant? It did not. We can see that it grew at this amount of growth between these amount of decades. So we can understand that when we are talking about technology in agriculture, it has the force multiplier of superseding every other factor of production, right? And also another evidence that we can get is from 2006 to 2022, when the Indian agriculture grew at 3.7% due to various agricultural interventions and various other government schemes, such as say building better rural roads, electricity, irrigation and communication infrastructure, such as the amount of awareness being spread to the farmers via SMSs and so on. So these were the factors of growth during this time and not say the increased amount of land. So we have to understand that factors of technology are better than factors of production right now when it comes to Indian farming. And also we can have another kind of observation. See, when we talk about say cereals, these are traditional crops, right? Now when we talk about eggs, meat, milk, right, fruits, these are the areas where India can have not only domestic consumption and also export consumption too. So that is why we can see the change from 1990s decades to right now. We can understand the change in milk has increased, the meat group has increased, the egg group has increased. This is also showing not only the export potential but also the amount of diversification that is being seen in the food habits of the people. So it is better that agricultural policies of today's focus on these crops too. And also there are two more crops such as pulses and oilseeds. According to a recent report, the pulses and oilseeds have been found out by NABARD that we are having as a country more reliance on the other countries such as Ukraine and also say the European nations for pulses, and oilseeds for example the Southeast Asian nations. So we have to also reduce the dependence on them. So let us use technological aspects in these particular crops. And also we can see that the crops like rice, wheat, cotton and other crops which are getting MSP. And also there are other crops like pulses which are also getting MSP, right? Their growth rate is around say at 1 to 2 to maximum 3%. But the same dairy, livestock, fisheries, fruits and vegetables, they are not getting any say MSP per se, right? But we can understand that their growth rate is far greater than the traditional crops. That is why we can understand that we need better investment in these areas too. We also need better frontier technologies such as use of artificial intelligence, machine learning, amount of 5G, then the use of drones in agriculture to better understand the growth potential and also to multiply the amount of growth potential in Indian agriculture. We also need to promote the advent of startups in agriculture too. And let me give you an example or say case study from Bihar, which is known as Dehat. Dehat as a startup is doing an excellent work in say bringing the seeds to farmers and marketing their products, and they are also generating billions of dollars in revenue too. So it is a very good model or case study too for your answers to even code. Now in the next article we are saying that recently Qatar is negotiating a truce in the Israel-Palestine region. Now Israel-Palestine issue has been going on for around say months right now, and there have been various violence in this particular area, and also humanitarian crisis is at unspoken levels. That is why various countries all around the world, including India, has condemned the amount of humanitarian crisis that is taking place. And here we are seeing that a country like Qatar, who is located in the Gulf region and the extended area of the Middle East, this country, despite being an Islamic country and an anti-Israelite country in the past, it is taking measures to bring in peace by involving both the Israeli parties and the Hamas group, and thus also signifying the amount of regional leadership in the particular region. Why we need to study this? Because we can use such examples in our essays, ethics, and even in our GS2, where we have the amount of effects of policies of developed and developing country on India's interest. Now let us understand what is mediation in the very first place. See, mediation involves particularly two or more countries and the involvement of a third country who is generally a neutral position and not having any direct or indirect stake in the conflict. For example, say the Israel-Palestine conflict which is taking place do not directly or indirectly involve Qatar. While we can tell that Qatar is not happy with Israel's policy of persecuting the Islams in, say, Palestine region, but we can say that it is not directly or indirectly related, and it is actually involved or interested in solving the issue between them, that is bringing the global community or say the regional community together. It is just like your elders who are trying to resolve a dispute between your brother or sister, right? It is just in the same manner. Now, why is mediation very, very prominent in international relations? The first is about promoting peace and stability, because we have to understand that Qatar, in this example, is in the close periphery of the Middle East. Any instability in the Middle East can also impact Qatar directly and indirectly too. So it is in the larger interest that they should promote peace and stability. Next, we have to understand it is also promoting national security. For example, in the case of India, for example, if Myanmar is something, if there are some issues in Myanmar right now, there are issues of refugees, for example, so the Rohingya refugee crisis in India. So it is important for India to negotiate with or say to bring in table both conflicting groups of say Myanmars and bring at a common table of discussion. So ultimately at the end of the day, national stability or national security can also be protected. Next, we have to understand that when a country seeks to mediate, bring in conciliation between the two warring countries, two countries in conflict, it essentially means that that particular country which is mediating is having a substantial amount of power. No one can ignore it, because when you are able in a position to able to afford mediation, that means the two countries will be listening to you. Here, the Qatar is having that indirect and direct influence on Israel and Palestine. That is why it is being able to bring a truce, which was very, very difficult in this conflict, because neither Israel, neither Hamas, they were not agreeing to anything. They were, Hamas were having the hostages of various nations, and Qatar took the initiative of doing this. And finally, we have to understand it is also about economic interest. For example, say if a country is able to solve two other countries, say, issues, it can also get in that particular country and having access to natural resources too. This is what even China is doing in the South Pacific, say, nations, and also in the South China Sea, where it is meddling in some internal affairs of some nations and say potentially resolving their issues directly and indirectly to stake an economic stake later over their natural resources such as oil fields, coal fields, and so on. Now, India as a country has also tried to mediate it. For example, say during the Nepal peace progress, Afghanistan war that was taking place from around 2001 to present, also the Sri Lankan civil war which took place and also directly affected India's interest to later. It is said that it was the failure of India's mediation effort in Sri Lankan civil war that finally led to the death of our former Prime Minister in the 90s. Next, India also contributes to the UN peacekeeping contributions, and it is one of the largest contribute to the UN peacekeeping forces, thus also directly or indirectly bringing in mediation. Now there are some notable examples of other countries too. For example, say Norway, which tried to mediate between the Sri Lankan crisis recently when Sri Lanka was facing a huge deficit in their resources, and also Philippines. Switzerland also negotiated between Cyprus, Georgia, and Syria. Then Oman also negotiated between Iran-Iraq war, and most recently we also seen France, which took a very, very important stand during the Ukraine-Russian conflict. So we can see these are the examples all of a, in a list that you can observe. Also, you can note it down for your own convenience. Now, in this particular conflict, we can see various dimensions. For example, in this Qatar mediation efforts, we have to understand Qatar is not having direct diplomatic relations with Israel because Qatar do not support or sponsor Israel's persecution of the Islam's region of Palestine. And also we can understand that Israel-Palestine issue is stretching on for so long. And it is very, very significant. This is the very first time that any Qatari official visited Israel for the very first time. Why? Because it is to bring a truce in the region. While opinions differ, but we can look at other dimensions too, that Qatar is having very, very close ties with the US. In fact, it is having one of the largest American military bases between the, say in the eastern hemisphere of the world, apart, when we see from the US perspective. So it is a very, very close ally of US. And let me tell you, during the 2001 terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center, right, Qatar also hosted the Taliban in their capital Doha for peace talks. It also hosts the Hamas's headquarters in Doha. So it considerably has amount of, say, political clout directly on the warring groups in such conflicts. And it is also said that the US officials generally force Qatar to be on this mediation side because US cannot directly bring a truce because US also has close allies with the, say, Israel. So it is being said that the US officials have been indirectly being forcefully of this truce. Next, we have to understand that according to Patrick Theros, who was a former US ambassador to Qatar, he is telling that this is soft power on steroids mobilized for America's interests. Why, if you may ask? Because among those hostages which were captured by Hamas, there were various US citizens too. So it may be the fact that US coerced Qatar to bring a truce and release the hostages. So this may be a point. But apart from that, we have several other dimensions too. For example, Qatar also hosted overseas Hamas political office since 2012. So generally, if it is hosting Hamas office in its capital, in Doha, it will be having some political clout. Next, the Al Jazeera, which is the Qatari media house, which is a very, very big media house, it is also having more media presence in Gaza as of now than any other Arabic nation. And it is particularly having that media coverage or showing that media coverage to the rest of the world too. So that is a very, very important aspect where the media aspect or say media representation of Gaza conflict is majorly controlled by Al Jazeera too. And we have to understand finally, Qatar is also interested or say very cautious about not letting this conflict spill over to Iran because Iran is indirectly related by various patrons which is supporting this Palestinian cause and also supporting the Hamas via supply of various missiles. Lebanon is also very, very supportive of Palestine cause and their Hezbollah militants are also having this stake. So Qatar is very apprehensive of the fact that let this conflict not be spilled into the rest of the nations too in the Middle East and Gulf. And it can endanger its own economic interests and national interests too. Now here, India's interest in this matter cannot be particularly stretched out because directly it does not involve India. And indirectly also, it involves India in so far limitations that it is not that much significant. But we have to understand that Qatar and India are on the same side on this. For example, Qatar and India both condemn the Hamas extremism in this particular issue. Then India also were very, very appalled at the humanitarian crisis that is unfolding in this particular region. Qatar is on the same side. And also when it comes to the amount of aid and calling for the truce, they are both on the same side. And even India talked to various representatives of both the sides, of both Palestine and Israel, to resolve this conflict as soon as possible. It is also a projection of India's leadership and soft power, particularly when we see that India did not vote against Israel at the United Nations. It abstained in the same way as it did during the Russia-Ukraine crisis too. So apart from this crisis, India did not vote against Israel in the United Nations. This signifies that India is having this balanced stance of not going against Israel, because Israel is a very close partner of India. And in the same time, India is also very supportive of Qatar's calling for truce and Qatar's calls for mediation, because India and Qatar, they also are a very close strategic partner, particularly when we talk of various energy requirements of India and also the large amount of Indian diaspora that is in Qatar. We have to understand that promoting dialogue and cooperation is in both interest of the India and Qatar too. And finally, we have to understand solving the humanitarian crisis is of topmost importance, and it is expected that the truce can be the solution towards this. Now in the next article, we are talking about the need for revamping the Supreme Court structure. And here recently, the Chief Justice of India announced his intent to create constitutional benches of varied strength as a permanent feature of the court. So let us understand what is this all about, because it is very important from GS2 perspective, where we have the various aspects of judiciary, its structure, organization and functioning. Now, before this, let me give you again brief background and basics. See, a Supreme Court in India is having different jurisdiction. The original jurisdiction refers to the particular cases where Supreme Court, or say the aggrieved parties can approach the Supreme Court directly. It can be a state if it is having a problem with another state or the center. And it can be also a particular case of infringement of fundamental rights of the people, because the Article 32 provides it so, under the writ jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. Article 132 and 33, they say that the Supreme Court have this appellate jurisdiction, where appeals from high courts can flow to the Supreme Court for the resolution of, say, criminal, civil and especially petition and these matters. Next, the Article 137, it talks about the Supreme Court's jurisdiction to review its own judgment if there are any errors or if there are any new evidence. And finally, the Article 143, it talks about the advisory jurisdiction of the Supreme Court, when the President of India, on matters of any important cases or important implications of a law, can refer the matter to Supreme Court for its advices. And also, when it pertains to any pre-constitutional treaty, the President can do so the same. But it has to be seen that this advisory jurisdiction, or the advice tendered by the Supreme Court to the President, is not binding on the President to accept. Now another important aspect or article here is this Article 145(3). It is about the setting of a constitutional bench. Now constitutional bench is very different from the other kind of jurisdiction, or say the cases, because it will be looking into a substantial question of the law as it pertains to the Constitution of India. Now there can be various questions of law when it comes to the Constitution of India, because Constitution of India has various articles that can be construed and substituted to different interpretations by different parties. So when it comes to the matter of some delicate legal affairs that can be ascertained by the Supreme Court judges, then the Supreme Court will be framing an ad hoc committee, or say ad hoc constitutional bench, that will be having 5 judges to the minimum, and that can be extended later to 7 to 9 and so on, cases of constitutional benches. Now hearings in Supreme Court of India is generally based on, say, normal hearings are sent to the division benches, where there are generally 2 judges, and also there are sometimes full benches where there will be 3 judges. Constitutional bench, let me tell you again, that it will be having 5 judges. And because it is involving matters of questions of law, substantiation of law, that is why it is requiring the 5 strength of judges here. Now we have to understand that in the daily functionings of the Supreme Court hearings, there are various frivolous petitions, such as even there have been petitions to remove some certain verses or say quotations from the Quran. There have been some various lewd amount of petitions which do not stand up to India's constitutional and even basic morality. So we have to understand that these petitions generally waste time and resources of the Supreme Court, because Supreme Court do not have right now a division of these very important matters, that are these constitutional cases and the other matters, that are generally most of these are from the appellate side, that is from this appellate jurisdiction. And let me tell you that there are around 80,000 cases which are pending at the Supreme Court. So it is very, very difficult for Supreme Court to find its time and resources. So here we have to understand that the 10th and 11th Law Commission of India, in its Law Commission report, it stated that we can do one thing. We can do the division of Supreme Court or its functions into a constitutional division, into a legal division. We just imagine one thing, that there has to be a division of labor, right? In any effective organization. That means one person cannot do the work of say 10 persons. That is what the Supreme Court right now is doing. It is hearing the appellate cases, it is hearing the constitutional cases. The same judges are doing that. And let me tell you, the constitutional cases are very, very difficult to actually sit on, because they stretch into discussions for say months and months and months. So that is why it is very, very important that the Supreme Court must be carving out a niche out of that. The grounds of this say different division for only constitutional cases and other legal division are that the appeals in Supreme Court are mostly from the high courts which are close by, say the high courts of Delhi and high courts of Punjab and Haryana. So these from these only the most of the appeals arose by, and they attribute to more than 50% of the pending cases. Now, say for example, if the Supreme Court operates in one manner, that the Supreme Court at Delhi will be having the constitutional bench, which will be hearing the most important cases that will pertaining to questions of law of Constitution of India. And apart from that, it will be having regional benches. These are the regional benches which are of the Supreme Court only. Say it will be located at various major cities. Now, people will not need to travel to Delhi to file an appeal. Why? Because they can do so at their regional benches. So they do not need to avail of transportation services, hotel services, advocate and record at Supreme Court. So these are the costs that will be reduced. These fees will be reduced of the legal community. Then also we have to understand, if we allocate or say divide the Supreme Court's functions in this manner, these heavy backlog cases will also be reduced, because they will be focusing on their own regional cases as a whole, right? And also they will be focusing, the main constitutional bench, they will be focusing constitutional cases. And also let me tell you, in colonial India, actually in the very beginning, there were 3 Supreme Court, right, at Bombay, Calcutta and Madras. These were not of the same characteristics that we see now, but back then also we had these 3 Supreme Courts at 3 different areas. So it is also very practical right now too. In a very, very important case, and also you should be remembering these cases, the Bihar Legal Support Society versus Chief Justice of India, 1986, it said that it is desirable. The Supreme Court itself said that it is desirable to have a National Court of Appeal that is separate from the constitutional bench at Delhi. So this will be allowing the Supreme Court to operate in a much more better, effective manner. And finally, we have to understand, it is the need of the hour, because according to 229th Law Commission report of 2009, it recommended a very, very good thing, and please do write this in your answers too. It recommended that there will be 4 regional benches at Delhi, Chennai or Hyderabad, Kolkata and Mumbai to hear non-constitutional cases. Here, 6 judges from 4 regional benches can be done, right? They will be looking at these particular cases. And let me tell you, at Delhi, Kolkata, Chennai or Hyderabad or at Mumbai, there will be Supreme Court judges only, because these are Supreme Court's regional branches. So this is not an extended wing of the High Court. This is Supreme Court only. And they will be having the power of Supreme Court. So let us deliberate on this. And also right now, there is this SC Vatia case which is going on in Supreme Court, which is looking exactly at these issues. So also let us wait for the verdict of this particular case. And very prominent is that recently the present Chief Justice of India, he is also advocating for the same. And right now we have to understand, today's Supreme Court is primarily functioning as an appellate court, because every year only around 8 to 10 major constitutional benches decisions are being passed. So the productivities of constitutional benches are very, very low, because the judges are involved in other cases too, such as hearing appeals, which can be effectively delegated to the regional branches. And also we have to understand, in 2022, only 4 of around 1200 or 1300 decisions were of constitutional benches. So we have to understand, while these cases are very, very important, but judges are not getting enough time for them. And we have to understand, there is an article in this constitution, in our constitution also, the solution is also given. That article 130 says the Supreme Court of Delhi will be there, no issues. But at any other places, and also the main branch also, the Chief Justice of India can appoint them after the, approval of the President of India. So it is in the greater interest of the people, specifically when the Directive Principles of State Policy, Article 39A, is talking about providing legal support to the citizens, affecting the legal aid in India. So we have to understand, this is a need of the hour right now. In the next article, we will be discussing the phenomenon of dollarizing an economy and what is that, because right now Argentina is planning to do the same, that is replacing the country's peso with the dollar. This is very important in prelims related to economics, because UPSC can ask what are the positives and negatives of this particular phenomenon. At the very beginning, dollarization of a currency means that, for example, Argentina is having peso. It is now telling that we will not be following peso anymore. We will be following the dollar monetary system in our country. That means we will be just following dollar instead of peso in our domestic currency. The positive is that the very first is about hyperinflation, which is a condition of very, very serious inflation in the magnitude of, say, 200, 300%, triple digit figures. That means the loss in value of domestic money is so much that it cannot be printed too much again, right? So that is why some countries, they do what, they bypass their domestic currency and peg it with the dollar, so that the dollar is not, say, witnessing inflation. It is a domestic currency that is seeing inflation. So when the currency will be linked to the dollar, now people will be now busy in getting more and more dollars, and in this way people's consumption will be decreasing, and when people's consumption will be decreasing, demand in the economy will be decreasing, and when demand will be decreasing, the prices will eventually be coming down. So that by decoupling from the domestic currency, we are linking with dollar, and people will be facing initially in say accumulating dollars, and that is why this will bring in consumption, demand, and hence the prices. Next, sometimes also during political times, or say during elections, the government prints too much of money to spend because they want to win the next elections. Also, we can understand when we are, say, affixing our currency to a particular international currency, we cannot manipulate the currency by printing. For example, Argentina cannot print too much of say dollars, right? So this is also curbing the political tendencies. Also, the next point is about, it is incentivizing the countries to focus on export successes, because it has been seen like countries of China, they manipulate their own domestic currency so that their exports will be cheaper. Now in this case, Argentina cannot manipulate the dollar. What they can do is they can focus on their export performances, export promotion of industries. So it will be good for their long-term export performance in the future. Next, we can understand that there can also be better amount of foreign capital that can flow in when a current country is adopting the dollar, because the foreign investor generally they have their trust in the dollars. Okay, next there are some problems also. The problem is that when we are, or say a country is fixing dollars as their currency, they are saying that they are not having monetary policy power anymore. Their central bank will not be able to operate in a free manner, because dollar is not their own currency. That is the US's currency, or US Fed is able to control that, not that particular country. So monetary policy is totally lost. Also, when there is too much of depreciation in the dollar or in their own currency, right, they cannot be able to control that. They have to lose exports in this manner. And finally, this was actually seen during the Greece and Eurozone crisis, where Greece, due to its total loss of monetary policy, right, it were totally insufficient to repay the loans it took back. And due to the financial crisis in Greece, they utterly failed in this manner. But there were some successful nations also, such as say Ecuador, Panama and El Salvador, who are still using dollars as their currency. They're stable economies as of now. So this was the thing that we need to understand in this article. Now, in the very final article, this is about the fiber optic cables. That is actually in this manner we are seeing that we have a plastic coating on the very top of these cables. Then we have a cladding which is used for protection. And finally, we have a core which is made of glass. So these are what is known as fiber optic cables, because we have to understand that right now we are in the age of the internet, right? Especially also during the COVID crisis, we have seen the amount of digital penetration of say internet has been so much that the amount of say education, financial institutions, their presence on the internet has been very on the higher end during the COVID crisis. So that is why we have to understand that the very thing that enables it is the fiber optic cable. How it operates, if you can say, it generally operates by in three stages. The very first stage is the transmitter. Transmitter then means that you are transmitting a signal, that is an electronic signal, in binary manner, that is either in zeros or one. And here you are sending that signal or information or transmission using a stream of light. Because we have to understand, light is an electromagnetic wave and it can travel in a long distance at the speed of light. So we are encoding the information in this manner and we are letting this pass through this glass tube as we have described above. And this glass tube is reflecting the amount of light in such a high speed that is almost traveling at the speed of light. So we have to understand also the phenomena that is working here is known as total internal reflection, because the very above material above the glass, this is the glass, and the above material above the glass is having a refractive index which is not similar to the glass. That means when the light will be hitting at the top of the glass, it will not be reflected outside the material, it will be within the glass itself. So it is ensuring that via using total internal reflection, the amount of information can be passed in a seamless manner, almost at the speed of light, right? And it was physicist Charles Cow who first in 1960s, 70s, he first said that we can transmit higher amount of information using glass versus copper. People at the time laughed at him, and ultimately he had the final laugh in 2009 when he won the Nobel Prize for the same. Because right now this is almost everywhere, and by almost everywhere I literally mean that it is also at the depths and bottoms of our ocean too. Because the entire world is connected via these undersea cables. These are undersea cables, which are bunch of optical wires that connect the entire world via internet. So you have to understand that we have seen that it is having three parts, that is the transmitter part, the signal carrying part, and finally the receiver part. And also Indian government in its 2022 to 20 budget, in its national mission on quantum technologies and application, it focused on a 5-year period for improving the amount of optical fiber connection in India. And also apart from that, we also have BharatNet, that is connecting most of the rural India via optical fiber cables. So these are the particular schemes. So this has been for today's. I thank you all for being a very patient audience.